I call it NHATS, but that's wrong. It's NATS. So forgive me if I mispronounce it to say NHATS. I wasn't trained well enough by Brent. Okay, so we're going to have an extended discussion of what NHATS is, NATS is, okay, and where it's going, whether we're going to improve it, what's its purpose, you know, where are we headed with this? I'll give a brief intro because it's on the CNEOS website. Dan will be talking as well. Actually, we'll have Brent in the middle giving a kind of summary of the NATS results to date. Okay, NATS. This is the main page. When you Google NATS and you come to our website, it's all about accessible NEAs, and these are NEAs that are accessible for human spaceflight. That was the original intent of NATS. Now, if they're accessible to human spaceflight, which involves a round trip, they are also going to be accessible for robotic missions as well at some level. But it's not clear that we're going to capture all the ones that are accessible on the robotic level if we require a return, a kind of a sample return leg. The main NATS table looks like this. It has filters at the top. I'm just showing the default values for filters. Things like what the total mission delta V is, how long you stay at the asteroid, the total duration of the mission, the size of the asteroid, the launch opportunities, which I will call your attention to. They are running from 2015 to 2040, and that's how it's always been. Now, many of those years are in the past now, so the question will be, should we change this? Should we have a moving window? And then orbit quality code is also a filter. And then once you set the parameters, you get a table of the most accessible asteroids, sorted in this case by the number of viable trajectories. Does my mouse work here? Oh, it does. So the viable trajectories column is how this particular sort is. And so the most accessible asteroid is the one with the most viable trajectories to get to. And that is our favorite one, 2000 SG344, a very Earth-like orbit. But you can click on any one of these columns and sort it that way. So you can slice and dice this with filtering and sorting, all sorts of things. I forget the total number of NATS compliant asteroids that you can get if you open up all the filters. We'll get there in a minute. The things that I want to talk about are these columns here, minimum delta V to get to the asteroid. So this picks out the one trajectory and gives the minimum delta V, the parameters, the kilometers per second, and the number of days of the mission for that particular mission. And then we pick out one other viable trajectory, which is the minimum duration. We get, once again, the delta V and the duration are given in this table. But we're not going to be able to show all trajectories. There's simply too many. The right-hand side of the NATS table gives observability parameters, and we're not really going to talk much about that. When is this asteroid next optically visible? When is it next visible from Arecibo or from Goldstone? So that just sets the context. I hope many of you are already familiar with NATS and what this table looks like. If you click on an asteroid, you go down to the detailed page for that asteroid. So in this case, 2018 PN22, and you get all the information that we have stored in our database for that particular asteroid. Again, in these two, we've picked out these two special trajectories and give you the details there, plus an icicle plot giving you the total mission delta V as a function of the departure date. So this is the basic information that we have. And we will talk about what else it would be nice to know about this, but it's not clear to me whether we want to expand this or we're interested in other questions. So I think this will be a discussion. I don't want to go into any more details. I'm included in the slide package, but the assumptions are and caveats. If you click, what I'm doing basically is picking off some of these tabs on the top. And this just gives the assumptions currently. Earth departure date here, 2015 is the first one up to 2040. The departure C3, that's the exit velocity. The total mission delta V being less than 12 kilometers per second. The total round trip mission time being less than 450 days. Maximum stay time at the asteroid stay time of 8 days. And the Earth entry speed of this asteroid, coming back, you can't come back any faster than 12 kilometers per second into the Earth's atmosphere. And then I have to mention the history of NHATS because I don't know whether any of the, uh-oh, we have a fire alarm. What does that mean? Well, I guess we have to adjourn.
There has been a report of an emergency. Proceed calmly to the nearest exit and leave the building immediately. Do not use the elevators, use stairwells where necessary. All handicapped occupants shall use the building evacuation plan.
Okay, so having had the asteroid emergency drill, we now had the hotel emergency drill. And New York is safe, I'm happy to tell you, as is College Park as far as we can tell. So we will go back talking about NHATS, and we will not be, our schedule is somewhat messed up. We will come close to, I think we should come close to finishing on time by skipping the break. So
That was our break.
that was our break. Yeah.
Okay, are we reconvened? Okay. I don't want to dwell too much more on the NHATS system itself. I wanted to say a few of the auxiliary parts of NHATS. One of them is the message that you can be on the NHATS email list, and every day you'll get a message summarizing those objects which have been recomputed in NHATS. And this particular example is from a week ago, and there were like 4 objects that were rerun through NHATS that day. And these would be objects for which there is new orbit. So when there's a new orbit, we'll rerun it through NHATS. And the star indicates that it's a new object. So we had one new NHATS compliant object on this particular day, which was, I think, a week ago. And there's more information at the bottom of this message as well. So some people rely on the email messages to start their processing. I also want to mention the API. NHATS data is available through our API. In fact, the API is kind of the glue on top of which the website is built. And so your software can query for NHATS results. There's query parameters. I'm just showing the top. There's a long documentation of the NHATS API. And I don't have the URL on here, but I'll get that URL for you. I think it was on an earlier slide, but I forget. So NHATS data is available to your software. Now, I want to switch subjects. Before I do that, this whole idea, going back to the table, let me go all the way back to here. With the launch, actually, I will go to the assumptions. This Earth departure date right here, 2015 through 2040. So the question came up, this whole topic, in fact, came up from the question, why not, ignore launches in the past, and let's kind of change the NHATS launch window and have it a sliding window or something like that. And we intend to do that. We have to establish exactly how to do that, whether to do it, against all the objects, because you have to rerun all the objects, or whether we want to do that gradually, because you could start doing it now and then kind of just gradually catch up all the objects, but it should all be done in one jump. That would, it's not clear exactly how long that would take, but within a few months, we could implement this sliding window. So that's one topic of discussion. In fact, it was number 1 topic for this NHATS discussion, is whether we should have a sliding window. And our opinion from my team is that, yes, this is something that is in process, and we are able to get this done in a few months. And it's just the details of how it's going to be done. That's fairly straightforward. We will get to other topics that Dan will raise in a minute, but I wanted to address the 9th topic while I'm up here, because, the 8th topic. So I am going to go to describe something that is related to robotic accessibility of objects. And I want to point out our mission design tool that we have already on our system that allows you to design missions to any of the NEOs, in fact, any small body in the solar system, through an automated mission design tool. And the URL is given at the top of this slide, plus some overview. I won't go into that. And there's even a tutorial. If you click the tutorial button, it'll show you how you can use this tool to find missions to Apophis. And you get kind of this pork chop plot. And these are available for all small bodies in the solar system. I wanted to point that out to you. Our intent is to produce a system that summarizes the accessibility of all the NEOs to robotic missions. And these are rendezvous and flybys. So it's like NHATS, but it doesn't include the return trajectory, okay? So I have informally dubbed this NRATS because it's robotic, but that's I'm partly joking, but we don't have a name for this particular system, but if I call it NRATS, at least you know what I'm talking about. This is something that is we're moving in this direction, but we don't have a schedule for it, and we're looking for community input on this, and maybe with some of the things that Dan will talk about in a minute are relevant to robotic missions. I don't know. I wanted to, however, point out that our engine is already in place, and the way it works is you can click on any one of these dots. In fact, you can click on any mission design on our system where you have launch date and what is that? The time of flight, launch date, and you'll get the mission for that. And it's interactive in the sense you can select a bunch of missions and they are tabulated below in a table, and you can investigate, then you can refine. And so this is a tool that is very useful for robotic missions, and you can do rendezvous or flyby missions with this tool. And that's all I have to speak of. I'd like to call on Brent, who, by the way, while he comes up here, is the originator of NHATS. And it was through a collaboration of Brent's team at Goddard and our team at JPL that got the system going in the first place. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Yes, so just a little bit about the history. The original studies that produced the NHATS system, one was conducted in late 2009, and then the first official NHATS study was conducted in September 2010. And then we recognized the merit in automating the process, and that automation of the system was completed and went online formally in March of 2012 to provide some historical context. The way that I like to describe NHATS to folks is that it's a nice complement to asteroid impact, Earth impact probability monitoring. So JPL hosts the Sentry system, which keeps track of Earth impact probabilities for NEOs that might have some mathematical probability of hitting the Earth in the future. So Sentry is monitoring the risk posed by near-Earth objects, while NHATS monitors the opportunities provided by near-Earth objects. Two sides of the same coin, and it's necessary to have both. So in whatever form NHATS takes in the future, whether it includes the robotic missions, which I definitely endorse, the NRATS that Paul spoke of. I do very strongly endorse the idea of continuing to monitor the small bodies population for mission opportunities, for robotic exploration, human exploration, resource utilization, to be cognizant at the earliest stage possible of all types of trajectories to interact with objects in case some might prove hazardous and we have to reconnoiter them or mitigate them. There's a host of reasons to be ever vigilant and always cognizant of all the mission opportunities available to the many, many, many small bodies of the solar system. It's very important. Paul spoke of some of the constraints in the NHATS analysis. Total round trip mission delta V less than or equal to 12 kilometers per second. Total round trip mission duration less than or equal to 450 days, and so on. And without context, those numbers may seem a little bit arbitrary. So one data product that I developed and maintain periodically is the following chart, which you can see before you, which is actually hosted currently as an SBAG science nugget. We're currently discussing possibilities for automating the production of this chart and hosting it as part of the ongoing NHATS presence online. So that's a potential coming future attraction. In the meantime, this chart shows the data that was currently available as of June 21st, so in the not too distant past, perhaps about a week ago. And as you can see, what makes 12 kilometers per second of total round trip delta V and 450 days, what makes those two constraints special is that in no modality that you can envision, whether it's a free return, flyby, a rendezvous in orbit, or any other type of mission, there is no mission to Mars that can be flown for both less than 12 kilometers per second delta V and less than 450 days round trip flight time. That means that every single NHATS compliant near Earth object holds a very special place in solar system accessibility space. So let that sink in for a minute. Every single one of the 2,828 NHATS compliant near Earth objects is more astrodynamically accessible than the planet Mars. 2,828 objects, celestial bodies, are more accessible to missions than Mars under these mission design constraints specifically. So ponder that. Okay, that's what makes these objects special. And in this chart, you can see the region of that accessibility space that the NHATS compliant objects occupy, all the green and blue dots in the lower left-hand corner of the page. The cyan, magenta dots here correspond to missions, round-trip missions to Earth's moon, where the cyan dots correspond to going down to the surface of the moon and coming home, and the magenta dots correspond to just entering lunar orbit and then returning back to the Earth. And so you can see that there are quite a few of these NHATS compliant near Earth objects that require less delta V to visit than our moon. Hundreds of them are more accessible in terms of delta V than our moon. And if you look at this front here, defined by these dots that are closest to the lower left-hand corner of the plot, there are many asteroids whose accessibility approaches that or rivals that of the lunar surface or low lunar orbit in both delta V and mission duration requirements. This knowledge is just current knowledge. We haven't discovered all of the near-Earth objects by any means. So it's important that we understand that as our view of the solar system evolves, as we discover all the objects that haven't yet been found, we're going to continue to find that many of the asteroids in our inner solar system are very accessible for missions. And studying them teaches us a great deal about the solar system and its evolution, as we all know here. And so that is why it's important for us to monitor these opportunities and remain cognizant of them. And I offer this chart as an ongoing, updatable data product to provide that context, because without this visual context, I believe it's difficult to understand exactly what kind of a special place the NHATS compliant objects hold relative to the remainder of the solar system. But I think that putting it into context with locations like the moon and Mars, and we could probably think of some other ways to frame it as well, helps us understand exactly where these objects reside. So I wanted to add these comments to those that Paul provided to hopefully paint a good, holistic, clear picture for all of you about exactly what NHATS is and why we do it, and why we're giving some careful thought to how to evolve the system. I don't want to take up too much more time because Dan is going to talk about some very specific point-by-point topics related to how we'll handle that evolution of the system. So I'd like to have Dan come on up. But all of us will be happy to take questions as the discussion evolves.
Yeah, and as my contribution to the history of NHATS, the understanding I have on the pronunciation of the acronym is that Lindley came up with that NHATS pronunciation because of all the colleagues and management that was bugging him about getting some answers to what's accessible out there. So that's from 2010, so you'll get a lot of dispute on that story.
Orbit diagram of all these objects relative to the Earth looks like a swarm of gnats.
Okay. Swarm of gnats around the Earth. So let's go to the next slide here. And this is just a list of questions that we've come up with on how gnats might evolve. And Paul has been assigned leadership on the discussion in a number of these topics, and he's already covered 1 and number 8. And we've also assigned the last one, number 9, which I hope we get to because it's a subject near and dear to my heart. Is there anything else we can say about the first topic? We're talking about this change in the window for Earth departure, which is currently pegged at 2015 to 2041. And I'm wondering, does anyone want to say anything about the frequency, and that includes people online, the frequency with which that window is slipped? My personal favorite is once per year, but I recognize that 28 of these asteroids probably are a considerable computational load to handle over New Year's weekend or something like that. I don't know if you could get a dedicated enough facility to process all of them.
Okay. Is this on?
Yeah.
I think we should, yeah. I think we should just do this 1 year at a time. And I propose that within a few months, I don't know exactly how many months, this is not our top priority. We can certainly slide the launch window, so that it will be, again, what would you suggest? 2020 to 20?
Yeah.
So we're going to slide it by 5 years, and we have that on our list to do in the next few months.
Yeah, I would think if you can do it circa January 1st, 2020, however, we recognize it may have to occur over multiple days because of the computation load. Because you not only are doing the 28, you're going to check the whole catalog.
Yes, it's a large job. And then we'll revisit the question of how often to do this. What you suggest once a year is we entertain that, but we need to look at it. I can't commit to that right now.
Right. And specifically, the window would open on January 1st, 2020 and go for the.
Okay. Does that sound reasonable? I think Paul Abel, here's a prime NHATS user. You have some comments? This is the easy topic, so we shouldn't spend too long on it.
No, I won't. So yeah, I think 2020 would be okay. I think having it updated maybe once a year would be good. One of the biggest comment that I get is from people is like, why are you giving us information that's 4 or 5 years old, right? That we can't meet. So
well, part of the answer to that is NHATS was a very specific study that was written as a paper, and we stuck to the rules, and of course, and so did Brent, and so it's
we just need to be evolved with the change.
So being NHATS compliant is now subject to which window, so things become more fluid now.
Yeah, and for a while, of course, all the missions were in the future for about 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Dan?
Yeah, Dan Masick, NASA Langley. So 2 questions. Is it possible to have a differential window? I know it's been set on these 5 years, but sometimes would it be in terms of the query when the user asks for it, if they want 2021 through 2023, get results from there. And then the second question is, sometimes it's neat to go back historically and see what was the opportunity before. Is there an overhead for keeping past dates, or can they just be stored and queried as well?
There's an overhead for all of this because it's stored in bins in a database. And so we have to redefine basically the database. And all of this is accessible through an API. So the API would have to change as well. So all of these possible changes have to be weighted against, is it really that important kind of question. And also, of course, budget. Each of these questions has a budget implication, and we'll turn our heads to Lindley later on, I'm sure.
And Dan Mazanek has already touched on one of these questions, but I'll get to that. So number two, in response to what I presented in the last SBAG on this NHATS checker utility, in a human spaceflight context, loiter time at the NEO destination is a primary justification for risks and costs a specific round trip from Earth incurs. Does it make sense to add loiter time as a NHATS output parameter? Because to one of my reviewers, it definitely did. Should the NHATS compliant mission with the longest loiter time be output along with the ones that have the minimum duration, the one with minimum delta V? Should NHATS produce another time of flight versus Earth departure date icicle plot in which color is driven by loiter time? And I showed an example of that at SBAG 19. SBAG 20. So any comments on that? Does that make sense to start working with loiter time at the destination? What I'm hearing from this one reviewer, and I agree, is that that helps mitigate the risk you're incurring sending people out of the Earth-Moon system for the first time in interplanetary space. The more loiter time you get, the better you justified that risk. Well, if there's nothing, no comments, we'll just let that stand. That's a possibility for the future. Then number three, in a human spaceflight context, mission abort options on the outbound trajectory leg following Earth departure will be a primary consideration in programmatic decisions, ultimately selecting NHATS compliant mission opportunities to actually fly. Does it make sense to add an outbound point of no return elapsed time since launch, which I call PONR for short, as a NHATS output parameter? So this is sort of like a point of no return. If you get beyond that on your way out to the near Earth object, you don't have the resources to get back anymore. You must commit to flying the whole outbound leg, staying at the near Earth object for however long, and then coming back, pretty much flying the whole as planned mission. So this point of no return is really important in selecting the object as well. Should the NHATS compliant mission with the latest point of no return be output for each NHATS compliant destination? Should NHATS produce another icicle plot in which color is driven by point of no return? Yes.
Joe Massaro, JPL. I don't want to be a wet blanket, but given the new Artemis push by headquarters for human spaceflight, how much work should we be putting into updating NHATS and adding more features and stuff? It seems like this is a lot more work for something that is no longer a priority of the administration.
Well, the priority is rather short-sighted, if I may comment on that. 2024 is going to be here and gone in no time. You're touching on a subject that's near and dear to my heart, because it used to be, and I think I touched on this in a previous SBAG presentation, it used to be that near-Earth objects were on the roadmap to Mars, because it would be foolhardy to think that because you can run, let's say, a 30-day mission in cislunar space, that you can fly a multi-year mission to Mars and back. And so just because this administration doesn't print roadmaps that contain near-Earth objects, for human spaceflight I'm talking, does not mean that they do not exist as sensible programmatic milestones on a roadmap.
I agree completely. I'm just saying, when is the right time to do this level of push-up work?
As soon as possible.
Wait until the roadmap is given to, wait until we're given instruction to do it, rather than doing it now. I mean, I guess that's the debate we need to have.
Well, I have a few comments to make about the previous comments. I would advocate that we don't make the mistake of coupling those decisions to the current, administration's exploration thrust. As I tried to convey during my remarks a few minutes ago, this activity transcends whatever the current program of exploration is. The monitoring of the small bodies of the solar system for accessibility and opportunity is a fundamental task. It's just as fundamental as monitoring them for Earth impact probability, is what I'm asserting. And therefore, the carrying out of these activities to curate the system and maintain it have nothing to do with the administration's current exploration focus whatsoever.
Dan?
Yeah, so Dan, I'll echo both your comments. I agree 100%. And there's a certain value in keeping it up to date as well, because sometimes you don't make a change and it becomes more laborious to make the larger leap. Specifically to number 3, I think that is a very valuable output. We've had a lot of discussions back when we were looking at human missions to near-Earth asteroids, and abort opportunities was a huge concern. As you mentioned, we go from cislunar missions, we make that leap to Mars. There's no abort there. Near-Earth asteroids offer that limited abort some of the objects. So having that parameter as an output is very valuable, especially if you found one that did have extended aborts. Multiple weeks or I'll just say weeks, where you could still get back, because then you would know the system, if there was a failure in the system, could return.
In fact, I will be willing at this point to go on the record as somebody who's programmed NHATS in a restricted way in NHATS checker. I will be willing to put number 3 out of question in terms of funding. I will do number 3 on a NEO by NEO basis. I'm not going to have some powerful system like JPL has in place, like Center for NEO Studies. But I am willing to do number 3 because I have it on highest authority in human spaceflight, and that is extremely important to picking the destination programmatically. Okay, we can do that, but I'll answer this question first.
So it might sound like a leading question, but it's not. How many of these things need to be generated like this for all asteroids, and how many of them would be generated once decision makers decide, here's our list of 6, just do it for those 6?
Right. See, that's what I'm thinking of for number 3. But I would say short answer to your question is some. There are certainly some. And let's keep that question in mind as we go through the rest of the list. I've been requested to just read the list. So we'll continue on, and then we'll come back to any that we have questions on. So number 4, for any NHATS output parameter, time of flight, Earth departure date, round trip delta V, destination loiter time, point of no return, is there value in displaying a compliant power spectrum? Consider a time of flight example. The spectrum is quantized into time of flight bins, 0 to 50 days, 50 to 100 days, 400 to 450 days. Would be a plausible implementation. For each bin, the number of NHATS compliant missions is tallied to form the time of flight power spectrum. And I should say, for a given destination. And I think what we've got right now in that API is you can do it for all 2828, but you can't do it for a given destination. So it's a slight twist, but that was something that one of the people that listened to the previous SBAC presentation came up with, and I think it has merit. Number 5, currently NHATS weights every compliant mission equally when tallying all missions associated with a specific destination. Would there be value from a weighted tally in which shorter time of flight, lower delta V missions contribute more to the tally than longer time of flight, higher delta V missions? If compliant power spectrum are available in NHATS output,
Is this weighted tally necessary? It may not be. 6, can public access to all NHATS compliant missions be provided for any specific NEO destination after it is processed? If so, would it then be possible for end users to weed out compliant missions according to reduced maximum time of flight, narrowed Earth departure date window, reduced maximum round trip delta V, et cetera? How would remaining Uber compliant missions be sorted, displayed, accessed? So we're talking about a depth of access that I don't think we currently have. I'm looking at Paul and he's nodding. Yeah, we don't currently have that. So this would mean a rework of the database. You probably need huge amounts of storage to record every single mission. You're talking like millions of missions for the most accessible NEOs, and then every single one of the 2828 would have all of its missions, up to millions, ready for public access. So it's a lot of data storage. Okay, number 7, to assess Mars-like human spaceflight mission round-trip durations by flying NEO missions progressively of longer time of flights. Is it advisable to increase the NHATS maximum time of flight from 450 days to 550 days or more? And I got this from a person that's planned a lot of Mars missions, and some of them get out into those kind of durations. He wants to see some overlap in Brett's chart between where the Mars missions are and where NHATS does its computations. That's what he's looking for. And then number 8, this is Paul's. I'll read it, but answers will come from Paul if there are questions. Should there be any relationship, interface, evolutionary path between NHATS and other mission design tools dealing with one-way, multi-destination, planetary defense, low thrust, or gravity-assisted trajectories? And I think this new mission design tool addresses at least the one-way capability. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. It's one way only, and it does many of these things. In fact, it does some of the things on the previous points as well. But our mission design tool is just one object at a time.
Right.
And so we don't have currently a roll up of all the asteroids, sorted in a big table where we store these parameters. Our intent is to move in that direction, and so. There is an evolutionary path to what I call NRATS or something like that, that will provide many of these things, including low thrust and gravity assist. That's possible in our engine, but that's TBD.
Yeah, and I can imagine you're talking about on-demand computational power that could really get out of hand without careful limitations. So I want to be sympathetic to saying yes to number 8.
So yeah, so the answer to number 8 is yes, and we intend to move in that direction, but it'll take some time.
Okay, and then number 9, which we haven't talked about, but again is Paul's to answer. I may comment. What's the rationale behind excluding near-Earth comets in the small bodies database from NHATS processing? Is this rationale consistent with ISRU interests or with potential low latency telepresence exploration missions to near-Earth comets?
So the answer to that is we looked at including the 107 near-Earth comets in the system, and I looked at the statistics of their orbits, and none of them would be, of the currently known near-Earth comets, would be NHATS compliant. That's not a surprise because comets are in eccentric orbits. And the most distinguishing parameter, as I mentioned to you in our email, is the aphelion distance. Being in eccentric orbit, many of these comets have an aphelion beyond, 4 AU or something like that. And none of the NHATS objects go out that far, because if they're out that far, they're going to be whipping through the inner solar system at a high velocity. So the answer to that is for current NECs, there's no overlap with NHATS compliancy.
So that has some interesting implications just to the acronym we have, which doesn't say Near Earth Asteroid Human Spaceflight Accessible Target Study. It says Near Earth Object. And in fact, we could step up to that and process, a few hundred more objects, I don't think would cost us much, and really live up to the acronym Near Earth Objects, Human Spaceflight Accessible Target Study.
Fair enough. Maybe Matthew will correct me, but I don't know whether we're going to gain any new objects in the NATS table.
Matthew Knight, University of Maryland. I'm not going to correct you, Paul. I was just going to say, I'm glad this got asked because at the start of the talk, I went and looked and I was trying to figure out were comets considered in this or not. So if you're not going to include them, can I suggest to at least make a disclaimer somewhere so that someone says, we've looked into this and it wasn't forgotten.
Because it was news to me.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's a valid question. And I think many of us orbit folks kind of intuitively expected that the comets would be excluded, but we also anticipated that comets were not on the list of the human exploration targets. So one side of my head says they were excluded by definition already, and the acronym was wrong then.
And the thing to keep in mind is we got another agenda item. Bear this in mind when we start talking about activity in asteroids. Active asteroids. What does that mean? And will we actually, as a spinoff from that, change the definition of what a near-Earth comet is to include maybe objects like Bennu? Maybe there's some other gray area in there that's even more active that we'll start calling a comet, and that will exclude that object from processing if it's not handled properly in the database, or if we don't expand the database to include any comet that's called a near-Earth orbit.
Fair enough. I think this is an agenda item tomorrow. But I just want to point out that some objects are dual designated by the NPC. They're both asteroids and comets. Our NATS processor, what it does is it takes all asteroids and pushes them through the pipeline. And dual designation objects are stored with the asteroids. So dual designation objects will get processed through NATS. So right now, I don't think there's an issue with this number 9. Unless the NPC is going to start designating asteroid-like orbits as comet only. So that's for tomorrow.
That's great. So are there any other questions on any of these topics here?
Just moving forward, there's no plans to depart from the current.
All right, so that's
NPC.
Gross Power, and the NPC does not intend, I think I'm interpreting this correctly, if you have an asteroid-like orbit, and it is maybe showing signs of activity, you'll give it a dual designation perhaps. But
Perhaps, yeah. So, but again, that's probably for tomorrow.
Right.
Yep.
Great. Let's keep this in mind for tomorrow, number 9. And I'm sure we'll have loads of people wanting to participate. If there's nothing else, I guess we're ready for the next.
Can I comment
agenda?
on
Yes.
just changes to NATS? Obviously impact us because we would implement them and they don't come free. So we have to prioritize things. And I would be interested to understand the priorities here. Some of these changes or discussion topics you raised are a significant, software addition. Not only would it require reprocessing everything, but it would require a dramatic expansion of the database because all of the results are stored in databases. And I would question whether some of these requests you're making cannot be satisfied simply by having a separate process that runs. You pick the asteroid of interest, and then you have a separate process that gives you the numbers you want. But to have it applied to all numbers and have it queried in the database is a more difficult task. And certainly, I would look to the community to ask exactly how much, where we should put our priorities. My own opinion is I'd like to see this NHATS robotic accessibility work go forward. And if we spend our time on the human accessible objects and going into these detailed suggestions, all of which have merit, that's going to detract from our efforts from going to the robotic.
Well, that's why I'm also appealing to the community regarding number 3. I will go off and do this. If the community can tell me where white papers and other information from computing point of no return for near Earth object destinations is useful, I'll be glad to direct it there. So I guess that's it for me.
So yeah, I just want to reiterate that in summary, that a lot of these, excellent ideas are not on our list of things to do unless we hear otherwise, unless there's strong interest from the community, except for this extension to the robotic. That's certainly our top priority on your list. Okay, that's it.
Very good.